Before a Celtic king could rule, he had to be chosen. Not by council, not by bloodline alone, not by conquest. He had to be chosen by the goddess of the land herself. She appeared to him, sometimes as a beautiful woman, sometimes as a hag, sometimes as a great queen on horseback at the edge of the territory, and she asked him a question, or made him a demand, or offered him a cup. His answer, his response, his willingness to meet her fully, that determined everything. If he was worthy, she accepted him. The land responded. The rivers ran full. The harvests came. If he was not, the land told the truth about it long before his subjects did. The earth withheld. The cattle sickened. The harvests failed. And everyone understood why. This is the sovereignty goddess tradition of the Celtic world, and it is one of the most coherent and psychologically sophisticated theological systems in human history. It is not a metaphor. It is not a fairy story that pre-literate people told because they did not know better. It is a living cosmology, a working theology, a framework for understanding the relationship between power, land, and the sacred. And it governed how Celtic societies understood kingship, authority, and the natural world for centuries. The principle at its center is precise. The land is female. The goddess is not a symbol of the land. She is the land. Her body is the territory. Her well-being is the earth's well-being. When the sacred relationship between the masculine and the feminine was honored, when the king met the goddess with integrity, with humility, with genuine reverence, the earth became fertile and the kingdom prospered. When the king was unworthy, or the sacred marriage corrupted, or the feminine dishonored, the land withered. This was not poetry. It was the operating logic of the world. The goddesses who embodied this tradition are not abstractions. They are beings with distinct personalities, specific domains, clear demands. Ériu, Fódla, and Banba are the three sovereignty goddesses whose names became the three names of Ireland itself, and that is not coincidence. The island is named for the goddesses who hold it. When the Milesian invaders came to Ireland in the mythological tradition, each goddess met them and asked that her name be given to the land. Ériu's name was chosen as the primary one, and it endures. The land carries her name to this day. The Morrígan is sovereignty in its most formidable form, a goddess of fate, battle, and the turning of kingdoms. She is associated with the crow and the raven, with prophecy, with the liminal boundary between this world and the next. She is not gentle. She does not flatter. She tests. In the great mythological cycle, she approaches the hero Cuchulainn, and he fails to recognize her divine nature and dismisses her. The consequences are catastrophic. Sovereignty in the Celtic world is not available to those who cannot see the goddess in front of them. Medb of Connacht is sovereignty goddess and warrior queen in a single figure, and in her we see something the later traditions would work very hard to make illegible. A woman whose sexuality, whose political authority, and whose sacred role are not separate things but one continuous, integrated power. Medb chooses her husbands. She holds the kingship of Connacht in her own right. A king of Connacht is only a king if Medb consents to rule beside him, and scholars including Mare Herbert have documented carefully how this sovereignty function operates in the earliest strata of the Irish mythological tradition. Medb is not a scandalous figure. She is the goddess doing what the goddess does, holding the legitimacy of the territory in her body and extending or withholding it according to her judgment. The ritual enactment of this theological principle was called the feis, the ceremonial feast of sovereignty, and it marked the inauguration of a king. At Tara, the ancient seat of the High Kings of Ireland, the feis was not simply a celebration. It was a sacred marriage. The king was united with the goddess of the territory in a ceremony that was understood to be both politically real and cosmically necessary. The historian and archaeologist Miranda Green, whose work on Celtic religion remains foundational, has traced how the land goddess tradition was enacted at sacred sites across the Celtic world, in Ireland, in Britain, in Gaul, always carrying the same central principle: Male power is derivative. It flows from the feminine. It is granted, not inherent. The high priestess who enacted the sacred marriage was not a symbol. She was the living embodiment of the goddess's authority, and through her body, she held the legitimacy of the kingdom. Female religious authority and female political authority were not separable in this world. The woman who stood at the center of the feis was not performing a ceremony. She was the ceremony. The distinction between the human woman and the goddess she embodied was deliberately thin. That thinness was the point. This understanding runs through the Welsh material as well, in the figure of Rhiannon, a being of the otherworld who arrives on a white horse that cannot be caught, who chooses Pwyll, the lord of Dyfed, and who brings with her the prosperity and otherworldly gifts that mark the blessing of the goddess on the land. When Rhiannon suffers, when she is falsely accused, publicly humiliated, forced to carry guests on her back like a horse, Dyfed suffers. The two things move together. The scholar Princess Mac Canna spent decades tracing the mythological sovereignty tradition across the Celtic languages, documenting how consistently and precisely this principle repeats. The well-being of the feminine and the well-being of the land are the same thing. This tradition did not emerge from nowhere in the Celtic world. It is the same theological principle that shaped the sacred marriage rites of ancient Sumer, where the high priestess of Inanna and the king enacted the hieros ganos, the holy union, and the land's fertility depended on the integrity of that union. It is the same understanding that governed the role of the wife of the god Amun in Egypt, where a woman's sacred authority was the theological foundation of the king's legitimacy. These are not unconnected parallels. They are expressions of the same very old human understanding. That the earth is not a resource to be managed, but a living being to be honored. And that right relationship with the feminine, human, divine, and earthly, is the condition for everything that sustains life. The erasure of this tradition was not accidental. It was systematic, specific, and carried out by named people making named decisions. When Christian missionaries moved through the Celtic world from the 5th century onwards, the sovereignty goddess tradition did not fade. It was actively dismantled. The great sacred sites were reconsecrated or destroyed. The feis was reframed as pagan abomination. The goddess figures were either stripped of their power, Brigid folded into a Christian saint, her fire-keeping priestesses replaced by nuns, or demonized, the Morrígan becoming a figure of fear rather than of sacred fate. Medb's political and sexual authority, which in the oldest texts carries no shame whatsoever, became the evidence of her monstrousness in later retellings. The pattern is consistent across every culture this series has examined. It is not women's failure that is erased. It is women's authority. The sovereignty goddess tradition was not suppressed because it had failed the Celtic world. It was suppressed because it was powerful, coherent, and held the feminine at the center of everything. What was lost is not simply a set of rituals or a body of mythological narrative. What was lost is a way of understanding power itself. In the sovereignty goddess tradition, power is not inherent in the one who holds it. Power is relational. It is conferred by the feminine, maintained through right relationship, and revocable when that relationship is dishonored. The king is always a consort. He is always answerable. The land is always watching. That understanding, that political authority is conditional, that it flows from the sacred feminine, that the earth has a vote, was not a primitive belief that more sophisticated societies outgrew. It was a sophisticated belief that threatened the particular kind of power that wanted no conditions placed on it at all. The sovereignty goddess tradition was real. It was practiced. It shaped how kingdoms were made and unmade, how the land was understood, how men and women related to each other and to the earth. For centuries, in one of the ancient world's richest and most complex civilizations. That it no longer governs how we think about power is not evidence that it was wrong. It is evidence that something interrupted it. And things that are interrupted can, if enough people remember them clearly enough, begin again.